you've ever spent time repairing things or taking something apart and putting it back together, you will have learned an important lesson. Sometimes you have to do things the hard way, the long way, whatever it might be, in order to make sure that you actually don't do more damage than good when you're doing repairs. Oftentimes, something like a little repair could turn out to actually damage a watch. Same thing happens with automobiles, CNC machines, anything that's highly complex, technical, especially when you start getting into things that have visible trim that has to look nice. And watches are both mechanical marvels, engineering masterpieces with hundreds of parts inside of a tiny little area that all have to function perfectly, but you also have the visual, artistic aspect, and those parts have to be flawless. That is the goal of the watchmaker, to maintain the perfection of the original timepiece. So as a watchmaker, we go through great lengths to make sure that we keep everything that we work on perfect. We use tools that are as perfect as they can be. And most importantly, we work very hard to keep everything clean. As you could imagine, we can't really scrub watch parts. So we want to keep them clean from the beginning. We can't let them get dirty, or so dirty that we have to scrub them, right? Because we have to do everything in such a gentle fashion so that we don't damage the finish, whether that's a mirror finish or a perfect straight grain finish or a special surface finish on the dial of a watch. These are all things that can be damaged seemingly by looking at the part the wrong way. A little piece of dust could become abrasive on the wrong cleaning tool. So it's really important to use all the tools at our disposal to make sure that everything we do remains clean, and if it does get a little dirty, we have to use the right tool to clean it. Some of the things that I use as a watchmaker are finger cots, which are little rubber gloves that go over each individual finger. And even with the finger cots on, we try not to touch anything. I actually clean the finger cots with something called Rodico, which is a watchmaker's putty, and it will grab any kind of dust or oil and hold onto it so that it's not on the finger cots. A fresh set of finger cots might be oil-free. However, they will attract dust. So by touching a watch part with bare finger cots, you'll transfer dust if you don't constantly use the Rodico between those fingers to clean the dust and any contamination off of those finger cots. We also go through a lot of finger cots, trading them out regularly throughout the day so that we always have a fresh set. Now with something like Rodico, this is almost like a Play-Doh. It's a very special Play-Doh that will pull oil off of parts. It will also grab dust, but because it will absorb oil off of a part, it's a one-use item, meaning you cannot use the same Rodico the whole day. You shouldn't even be using it for more than a few swipes of oil. If you're cleaning one part, you need to have fresh Rodico for that part. If you are cleaning a dial using something like Rodico, it absolutely must be fresh Rodico, and it needs to be used very carefully so that you don't put any residue that might have been picked up earlier using that Rodico and deposit it onto a dial, or have any pieces of dust that might be embedded in that Rodico that would scratch the dial or scratch a high polished applied numeral. So we always have to think about Is that thing that I'm using to clean actually dirty and going to damage the watch part? Similar to automotive cleaning, you would not want to take a rag that you just cleaned the wheels and tires of your vehicle and use that on the hood of the car. It would be full of salt, sand, dirt, brake pad, dust. All of these things are abrasive. And then you would essentially rub it onto the paint of the car, causing more harm than good. So this is always what we're thinking about. We're thinking about what is the potential here to do damage, and is it worth it? Sometimes it's not worth it. On dials and hands of watches, this is an instance where you will see oftentimes the possibility of either a slight manufacturer's defect, meaning possibly a little imperfection in the paint, or what might look like a piece of fuzz in the paint, things like that. Very small, microscopic really. And as a watchmaker, you have to determine if you're going to try and clean that or not. Oftentimes with dials, attempting to clean will cause more damage. Same thing with watch hands. A high polished watch hand can only be touched so much on that top surface before you start to cause damage. We have special wipes that are also used in clean rooms for electronic assembly and other types of medical device assembly. These special wipes are formulated to not leave any lint because they are certified for clean room use. The wipes that I use are called Tex Wipe. They look like little Q-tips, except they're much more expensive and they are single use, so they're tossed after any wipe that you clean with. We can use them to wipe a piece of dust off of hands, or we could even dip them in a little denatured alcohol. If you have a set of black oxide hands that may have become a little cloudy on the surface, we can actually remove that little bit of surface oxidation, discoloration that appears by simply wiping them. If it's very thick, then we might actually use a little bit of a polishing paste to remove that. But it has to be a very, very clean polishing swab or leather buff that is fresh with that polishing paste. Rodico will not be able to clean something well enough, such as an entire jewel that has the wrong oil placed in it. That bridge will have to go back into the cleaning system, be properly cleaned, and then reassembled. But Rodico could be used for a little bit of oil that is found on the top of a bridge or on the flat of a jewel. These are places you could remove a little bit of oil by cleaning it so that you don't have the oil on the top flat of the jewel or on a part of the bridge that you don't want it to be. Another really important cleaning tool is compressed air. Now, compressed air can potentially do some damage, but if it's used properly, it's actually a really safe way to remove dust. For instance, on a dial of a watch, you can use compressed air. Once you have an assembled movement, if you were to try and spray some dust off of an assembled movement with compressed air, you would actually blow the oil all over inside of the movement. So you never want to use compressed air on a finished watch or movement. You could use it on an individual component when that component is dry without oil. So it's typically used to check dials. Prior to putting them onto the watch, we will actually inspect a dial, clean it, and make sure everything's perfect prior to putting it onto the watch. Then once it's on the watch, it should be relatively clean already, and we already know that it's good enough. From there, we can then use things like a Tex Wipe, or we could use a bulb, hand-operated compressed air, which is much more precise and a lot less powerful, and we can really target the way we are blowing that dust so that we're not blowing into the movement and causing any disruption of that oil. When we clean metal parts, we can use denatured alcohol, and we can use that on a Tex wipe, or we could use that on a specially sharpened piece of wood. We use wood that's almost like a toothpick in order to do a little more aggressive cleaning of parts. It's not something you would ever want to use on a watch dial or a watch hand because you will very likely scratch those perfect surfaces. We actually shape the wood by using files or knives in order to sharpen it, whether it's into a point or into a flat blade. It really depends on what component you're trying to clean. Even every time we use an oiler to grab a tiny droplet of correct oil, we always clean the oiler before we put it into the oil cup. We don't want to contaminate that oil cup every time we place an oiler in it, because we'll use that oil for a number of days before we clean it out and put fresh oil. Denatured alcohol evaporates and will not leave a residue, so that's why we use denatured alcohol. I have a special canister on my workbench that allows me to pump a small amount of denatured alcohol into the top lid so that I can use that small amount and I don't run the risk of contaminating the entire jar. Alternatively, if you have a jar that you maybe dip a Tex wipe in or dip something into, you'll end up contaminating that jar. So these little pump containers allow me to always get fresh denatured alcohol and not contaminate the jar. In order to clean my bench and keep it dust and oil free, I use special wipes that are actually designed for cleaning glasses. These wipes are lint free and they contain a very small amount of rubbing alcohol. They don't leave a residue. They will pick up that oil. They will clean up any dust or debris. So this is how I clean my bench prior to laying any parts on the bench or getting moving with assembly or repairs. So if you ever wonder how your watch is so perfect when you look in through the dial or if you can see into the movement, remember that every little detail was thoroughly thought through by the watchmaker that was assembling that watch or repairing that watch. There was nothing that was overlooked in that repair or assembly. Even the tiniest little thing, such as cleaning a piece of dust off of the dial, was done in a very specific and well thought through manner so that no damage would be done.